Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Red, White, and Matt Show with Kenny. Today, we're going to be discussing the Federal Reserve in our Discovery series, and I believe this marks episode number 3. So first, we're going to start with a video that kind of goes into the Federal Reserve System, explains a little bit about it, but this one more so is a video on whether or not central banks should be independent.
Jerome Powell was a few months into his job as the chair of the Federal Reserve when the US President Donald Trump complained about the central bank's policies.
I put a very good man in the Fed. I don't necessarily agree with it because he's raising interest rates.
He's not the only one complaining. Italy, India, Turkey, and Argentina are just some of the countries seeing leaders push back against central bank independence, and some are succeeding. In the last few years, we've seen central bankers get fired, resign, and have their decisions and motivations questioned. That's led to a number of voices declaring that the independence of these public institutions is under threat. But why do we even care whether central banks are independent or not? It's kind of a long story. Let's go back almost 100 years for some context. After the First World War, Germany was in a lot of debt, and its costs were racking up. Soldiers needed pensions, war widows needed compensation, France and Great Britain were demanding massive reparations, and other countries did not want to lend Germany any money. So Germany's central bank printed more and more money and loaned it to the government, hoping to make up the difference. What they ended up with instead was hyperinflation. All that cash caused prices to skyrocket. At the height of the crisis, hyperinflation reached rates of more than 30,000% per month, meaning that prices were doubling every few days. That's why in some historical photos you will see Germans burning cash to keep warm, because it was cheaper than buying wood. This and more recent examples like the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe and Venezuela has shown us the damage that out-of-control inflation can do to an economy and its people. So when the Bundesbank became Germany's central bank in 1957, its focus on a stable currency and keeping out-of-control inflation at bay were no surprise. It was the first central bank to be given full independence, and it quickly gained the reputation of being the world's most independent and conservative central bank. At the same time, the Bank of England and most of its European counterparts were still controlled by their governments. Let's get into why that matters. Throughout the 1960s, most policymakers believed you could permanently lower unemployment by accepting higher inflation. This economic concept is known as the Phillips curve. So conventional wisdom was that the central banks could increase the money supply, inflation would go up a bit, and more people would have jobs. It sounds great, right? Well, politicians love this idea too. After all, a low unemployment rate is helpful when we're trying to get re-elected. Take former US President Richard Nixon. He inherited a recession when he was inaugurated in 1969.
Our destiny offers not the cup of despair, but the chalice of opportunity.
And when it came to getting re-elected, he was focused on keeping the economy moving. The best way to do that, he thought, was to lower interest rates.
A lot of the people are going to say, well, here we go back into higher interest rates again. I don't think that's a justified assumption.
Behind closed doors, he pressured the Federal Reserve Chairman to do just that. And even though the Fed is supposed to be independent from the government, the central banker appeared to comply. The economy got its boost, and Nixon was re-elected. But he got a rude awakening not too long after that. Enter the Great Inflation, the first prolonged major period of inflation the world had seen during peacetime. Annual inflation rates reached levels of over 10% across OECD countries, and some people began to panic. What's worse, the Phillips curve didn't hold true over the long term. Inflation was high, and so was unemployment. It was lose-lose, a phenomenon known as stagflation. Many people pointed to the 1970s energy crisis as the culprit, which caused the price of petrol to skyrocket.
Gasoline stations ran dry. Airlines cut back flight schedules. Factories were forced to close.
But the general consensus today is that the monetary policy of the time played a significant role as well. Just take a look at this chart. You can see the inflation rates in the US, UK, Italy and Japan spiking during the Great Inflation. But Germany, home to the Bundesbank, kept inflation at a much more modest level. So did Switzerland, which also had an independent central bank. The 1970s exposed flaws in having governments controlling central banks. The nature of election cycles means politicians have an inherent conflict of interest when making decisions that impact the economy.
As the recovery gathers pace, so our political fortunes will continue to improve.
It's tempting for them to skip unpopular choices like raising interest rates or cutting the budget deficit in an election year. So during the 80s and 90s, many central banks, including the Bank of England, were granted independence. The European Central Bank was established in 1998 and was modeled on the Bundesbank, meaning it was independent from the outset. The system had changed. Politicians still set the broad goal, keep prices stable, but it was up to the central bankers to make it happen.
I want an end to the stop-go, the boom-bust economics of the past.
Billions of people around the world got used to low and stable inflation and the security of knowing the interest rates on their bank deposits and mortgages were under control.
Interest rates had come down, inflation is down.
But then the financial crisis happened.
But will these moves by central banks solve the problem?
Pushing central banks into the spotlight, they announced emergency measures and unconventional steps to prop up the economy. Essentially, central banks became crisis response units, trying to stop the next Great Depression.
The ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro.
Some people began to question whether the institutions really had their best interests at heart. Protesters complained central banks were too secretive and that they cared more about bailing out big banks than helping everyday people. And of course, there was failing to spot the financial crisis in the first place. Even though central bank independence was put in place to stop inflation from going too high, some point out that a decade after the crisis, the actual challenge is inflation rates being too low. So, is their mandate still relevant? It's a question many are trying to answer, including some central banks themselves. But however they evolve, central bank bosses argue trust is key for them to be effective. And to be trusted, they have to be independent.
Without independence, policy is bound to go astray.
Yet, it's not that easy. Despite their supposed independence, most central bank heads are appointed by a political process. For example, the European Council picks the ECB head and the US president selects the Fed boss.
There are few more important positions than this.
In extreme situations, governments fire central bankers too. Take Turkey. President Erdogan fired his central bank chief in July 2019. Many speculate this was due to his unwillingness to lower interest rates at Erdogan's request. Research has consistently shown that economies perform better and prices are more stable when central banks are independent. But with populist leaders in power and interest rates at historical lows, whether central bankers will be able to hold on to the autonomy they've enjoyed over the last generation remains to be seen.
Did you like the video?
You know what? Actually, I was actually kind of surprised. It was better than I was expecting. But, you know, we talked about this right before the show that, you know, usually two kind of camps when it comes to central banks, right? You have the people, especially when it comes to whether or not they're independent or not. You have one camp that is wholly for, yeah, they should be independent, blah, blah, blah. And that was definitely one of those videos based upon some of the words she was saying, right? And then you have the other people who are like, the whole thing's a scam. And they've been clashing for decades. So,
yeah, I mean, I swear I saw Robert De Niro with a baby in that. Like, I swear, I looked, I was like, is that Robert De Niro with a baby? But yeah, so like, one thing I noticed, even looking at some of the other videos, in regards to this selecting this video in particular, the other ones were like kind of boring and like really long and just like over the top. I was like, it's too much. But essentially, right now, what we're looking at looks very, very similar to really the 1970s. If you look at it, what we went through in the 1970s, which they covered it, I think, a little bit in that video too, with the increase of gas prices and food prices. We're seeing similar situations right now, and that's because interest rates are also extremely low right now. And we're starting to see that inflation go up, and we already know the unemployment's high. The real unemployment rate, I believe, is over 10% right now. So yeah, I mean, I think we could have a restart, maybe those 1970s type times. I don't know how you feel on it.
Well, my view on it, okay, so if we go back to our potential central bank started, 1913 or something like that?
Yeah.
And we've had, let's see, the 1920s, or no, it was I think 1920s boom and bust, or 30s. In 1929, so it would be the 30s. So, and then we've had the 1970s. We had the 2000 dot-com bubble crash. We had the 2008 housing market crash. Arguably, I've said it before, we had the whatever crash happened in mid-September of 2019, and we're still technically going through it. Just most people haven't even realized it. So there's a question of how effective has a central bank been, under the terms of service that they have right now. I would argue they have some good periods and they have some bad periods. Now, as far as them being like independent or whatever, okay, you have a major. Well, let's just take Americans, right? We have 12 different districts of central banks each, and then a board of members. I think there's 12 or 6 of them on there, and they're appointed by the president I believe it's like every 2 years. It could be longer. And does that influence slightly the central bank, where they're not 100% independent? I would say yes. But on the other side, can you afford as a society to have 6 people or 12 people or whatever's on the board dictating what happens to 300 million, people in America without any consequences or input from the government? I would say no as well. Okay, so if the Federal Reserve decides that they're going to jack with your economy, and here's kind of a weird twist to it. A lot of people understand the fact that economics drives politics, right? If your economics are doing good, people tend to get reelected, and that video kind of brought that up, right? They didn't touch on it real heavily because that is kind of a heavy subject, but it's true. And Nixon getting elected because of a good economy is a good example of that. So
and I think that's almost what got Trump reelected. I think if COVID wouldn't have happened, I felt like he would have taken it.
And this is where I'm going with this. What's your situation when, hold on a second, does it every time. What's the situation if 6 of the central bankers or whatever, I should have got the number now, I'm pretty sure it's 6, decide they don't like Trump and they start jacking with interest rates and jacking with the economy to inflate it or deflate it in order to get rid of a president? And I think it's quite clear that at this point in time, because right now they're coming out how everything's doing good, there's no bubbles, blah blah blah, good old Biden's president. They're trying to sweep the fact that there's a pandemic going on under the rug for what? So they can make Biden look better or whatever.
Yeah.
So it smells funky. I mean, it smells funky, especially to me. It's like, okay, so did you do that? Or are they trying to paper over a systemic problem that's been going on for decades? I mean, honestly, if you look at the numbers, we never really recovered from 2008.
Yeah, that's what I think. Fault is that? I think it's the Federal Reserve, and like Peter Schiff's been pointing this out multiple times, that it's the Federal Reserve that kind of keeps covering up the problems. And something he brought up the other day is this: he's like, when do they hire the interest rates? Right? They're like, basically, it's one of these things like this. It's it's, well, we're in a bad time, so we can't do it right now. And then when you're in the good times, you're too busy enjoying the good times, so you don't want to hire at that time, right? So it's like one of those situations where it's like someone, just because someone's in the presidency, they don't want to do it on their terms at that time, and they're wanting to pass the buck on to the next guy, and hopefully it doesn't fall on them. Is basically what I think's been going on from president
I
to
don't
president.
think I don't think
Because
it's
no one
even
ever
a
wants to take
presidential
care of the
issue.
deficit either. That's another big problem.
But see, here's I don't think it's a presidential thing. I think it's a government-wide system because I've explained it before, where with the position we are in,
I
it
feel
is
my
my
presidents
opinion.
generally just don't understand the situation. I feel like
I think they do, and they understand and let's talk about the ramifications. What happens if all this money that's floating around the debt market cannot be sustained? Well, the credit market would crash overnight. This is what the central bankers basically
and
told
China would be
Congress.
coming for their money. The public would be coming for theirs if they could. And
I think they already are in a lot of cases. I think
yeah,
I think the smart money's been getting after the real dollars for a while. Because I said it before, September 18th, 2019. That's when the real market really crashed. Because right after that, the Federal Reserve was pumping $100 billion. They called it reliquification and not QE. So
yeah.
quantitative easing. But what it really was, it was quantitative easing on steroids. The following weeks and months after the September incident, where basically interest rates went up into double digits for overnight lending because the banks just didn't have any money. Why didn't they have any money? Because people didn't have any money, and the people who did have money was pulling money out of the bank.
So one of the things I was looking at was basically like, so if you look back in the history of the country, right? Would you say 1913 is once we got the Federal Reserve?
I believe it was around 1913.
Yeah, I think that's right. So before that, we didn't have a Federal Reserve Bank. And then I think she brought it up in the video too. But there were like some pretty hard economic times too. Like it was real rocky. Like if something happened, like well, we can't do anything. We just like sit there and ride it out. Hopefully everyone's good.
If you think about it, one man, I believe it was Rockefeller, bailed out the entire federal government.
Yeah, right.
So like, could a single man do that today? Maybe the Queen of
Jeff
England.
Bezos, maybe
we could be saved by one woman.
Or Elon, probably not Elon Musk, but
they got
Jeff
nothing.
Bezos.
They got nothing on the Queen of England. Nothing. she owns like 13 continents if you split it up for countries, whatever.
So like the question is, so I looked into, can we just not have a central bank, right? And basically in the entire world, almost everyone has central banks, like China, Japan, Germany, as we saw. The only places that don't have them are like really small, like Pacific Island nations, basically.
Basically, all the people we're trying to bomb at the moment. Just throwing that out there.
So like that tells me, that you have to have one. I don't think you can get away with not having it. So I think the question is this. I am in agreement with, I think you do need an independent bank. Now, another question might be, what if there were multiple independent banks? I think that would be maybe like a 3-bank type system where the government can kind of, it'd make them kind of like compete in a way, right? And you could even, I don't know. So I think that's an interesting concept, maybe.
I think the question becomes, what is the role of the central bank, and how much do they need to respond to the government? I think is more the question. I mean, I think there are economic benefits to having a central bank, right? One is economic stability, like they brought up.
Right.
But what have we gotten? I mean, if you look at the Fed's balance sheet right now, right, it's just skyrocketing, right? Guess what else is skyrocketing? I want to say NASDAQ, but it's not NASDAQ. The stock market. Stock market's been going up in proportion to how much the deficit has been going up for the Federal Reserve. When I say deficit, how much their accounts are saying,
Yeah.
So, and the Fed has openly admitted that they're buying on the open market, stocks, bonds, and I would say reserve notes. I'm a little foggy here today, guys. So we have a situation where the Federal Reserve is buying certain kinds of assets, on the open market, which is causing an inflation. And I think they're doing it to keep the bond bubble from busting, right? So, okay, nobody wants to be around when that little balloon pops, right? So it doesn't appear that after all these decades that the central bank has come up with a means to keep that from happening. Because we go this, cycles, every 15, 20 years, we go, go down, go up and down, go up and down. It's a natural market cycle, right? It's got to happen at some time. The excess has got to bleed off. But it has gotten so bad since 2008, because basically the Federal Reserve's monetary policies hasn't really changed much in the last, over a decade. So we're going on 12 years now. So, and now it has created this massive, and I would argue massive,
It's like
bubble in multiple sectors.
super low interest rate, and then the inflation is like there, and they're just not bothering with like messing with and that's something they brought up earlier is how low, like would a zero inflation rate or close to zero be good? Like I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
okay, what kind of inflation are we
I
talking
think
about?
it depends, because I think there's times where we do need like zero inflation. Like I think some years we need no inflation, just because like there should be some type of price control for goods and everything that we have, right? That doesn't mean that production's like not happening. So like that, I don't know.
Well, okay, so but there's kind of two different kinds of inflation we're talking about here. One is inflation of prices and services, right? Okay, so if we look at, back in 2000, I think my parents bought a car, right? And it cost like $11,000. It was full. It was a fully loaded Toyota Corolla, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now that same car is almost 30,000. It's like $24,000. But at the time you get taxed on license, you're almost 30 grand. So that is 3 times the original price, if memory serves me correct. Well, if you break that down over 22 years, that's like 10% year after year on how much that car's cost. If you go now, and this is how the government gets away about saying there's no inflation. There's about 110 different what they call consumer items on
Well,
a
they
price
admit that there
index.
is inflation. They just try to say that the inflation isn't that bad.
Well, what they do is they mix, they take products in and out of this list
Oh,
that
yeah, I got
define what is, and that's how they were able to manipulate what the real price index is. Like a gallon of milk is subsidized by the government.
you. Right.
Wheat and flour is subsidized by the
Yeah,
government.
all the
So they can,
agriculture.
yeah, so they can go in there and subsidize these, and it hides the real inflation cost, because it might
Yeah.
cost the farmer more. Maybe it cost them $4 a bushel instead of $3 a bushel the year before because of fuel and labor cost, right? But since they're getting subsidized by the government, me and you as consumers, we never get to see that real cost because the government guarantees it at a certain price, right? So, and then they make it affordable for the agricultural people to produce these goods and services, and then they add these products onto a list that they call the consumer price index, right? So that measurement inflation. So this is why you don't see milk going up, you don't see bread going up, you don't see cans of beans really going up, and these are the items that they decide that they want on this list to decide how much inflation relates. But that's a different kind of inflation. You also have inflation of the actual economy. Okay, when they say inflation in the economy, let's say this year all industries will build $1 trillion with a product, right? Well, a 20% increase in GDP, which should also be inflation, would be like $1.2 trillion next year. So when we look at inflation, and of course they can mess with the numbers on this too, because they can say the value of products go up and down, right? But it's more or less, amount of stuff that is, built and sold. That's a whole complicated thing. So when we look at economic inflation, we're talking a lot about, we're building more material, we're building more value, more added value. So let's say, you work at McDonald's and you're sitting there building McChickens, right? Well, when you take the raw ingredients, you buy it at a certain price,
Yeah.
and then you convert it into a McChicken and then you sell it. Well, that's what we call a value added service, right? So when we add jobs to these kind of things, we produce more goods and services.
Yeah.
That's also inflation. And
And
of course
that's
they
one of
don't
the
grow.
things that keeps us ahead of like most of our competitors economically, is the fact that like our economy is a high tier economy, because if you look at the US in the past 20, 30 years, we're getting really into tech, which is like a high tier economic activity. Therefore we're keeping us ahead of us. However, At the same time, he put manufacturing back overseas into China and all that. So these guys have been able to catch up, and then their economies are becoming high tier much quicker. And China is like, coming up right behind us now. I mean, I'm
Well,
not
see,
going to
there's
say
a
their
difference.
GDP is always like accurate, but
I would almost call. I don't think ours is accurate either. So I can't really like. I don't like China, but I can't really knock them because we're staring down the same barrel. You know, do you believe anything coming out of any of these Fed chairs? I would say no. Like one of them came out. I think it's the Federal Reserve of Missouri came out. The other day and said they see no inflation. I'm like, you
yeah,
just gotta look at the numbers, and if the Federal Reserve, if the
that's
Federal
that's
Reserve
what Powell
quit.
said like the other day when he had his hearing.
Yeah, if the
So
Federal Reserve quit injecting money into the stock market, it would collapse overnight. I guarantee you. If that's not a bubble, I don't know what is because it can't sustain itself. It has to have the Federal Reserve pumping money into it 24/7, 365 to keep it inflated. And if they let it contract too much, the debt market will just go belly side up overnight. So they have to keep inflating it to keep it from collapsing, and they can't step away from the situation and allow it to. Because I mean, what is the one job? What is the one job of the stock market? Right? It's to find fair value. It's to find people who want to buy a product and people who want to sell a product and come to a mutual agreement, and everybody's cool with that, right? That's just one job. It has not been allowed to do that job, and I would say in a couple of decades, maybe more. So, do you believe anything these people are saying? And is that not political? I would say it is because you have to have a central bank that is working with the local legislation and federal legislation to come up with a policy to keep the whole thing from crashing. You know, and if the federal workers are not working with the Federal Reserve on this particular issue, I don't know if either one is doing their job. I don't know how either one can do a job. It's not, hey, look, here's the situation. Here's what we can do about it. Blah blah blah. Let's come to an agreement. You're going to get out there on your podium. You're going to say this. We're going to get on our podium and say that. So, is it independent and is it not political? I would say at this point it's highly political and
yeah,
it's really fascist because I can't tell the difference between who's in control. Is it our government officials who are supposed to be
yeah,
representing us, or is it these private banks that get to decide,
hmm
you know, monetary policy that affects everybody in office?
yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, also you're not even including like the lobbying activity going on, all that extra stuff. So we're in a tough situation, but what we do know is the value of the dollar continues to go down. And somehow the world, I guess, is just not taking notice of this. I
No,
think
no.
the
Here's the
smarter
deal.
countries have, but these other countries just tend to be like, well, I guess the U.S. dollar is strong, and I'm like, something's going to happen with the dollar. Like we keep printing, we're not doing anything to the debt, and it's like the dollar is backed off what the US government can pay on their debt, right? And that deficit's just getting out of control. So it's like, it's not looking good.
Well, here's the thing. You cannot have hyperinflation with a low money velocity, right? We've had a stagnant money velocity for probably close to a decade, right? The velocity of money is every time, like say me and you make a transaction and I hand you $1, that counts as like a one, right? And then if you take that money and then you give it to McDonald's, that makes two, right? Well, we've been holding around three, so every dollar that gets printed out gets exchanged 3 times per like year or whatever, right? So, and that's historically low because it's usually been, between 4 and 5. So you can't have higher inflation if people aren't out there buying stuff. If that makes sense, at least not at the moment, and the video kind of brought this up. They were talking about, uh, who's benefiting, off of this marriage between the private banks, and the actual federal government, right? During this whole pandemic, I want to say the uh, top 20%, or actually maybe 1%, let's just say top 20% of all companies, you know, your mega companies, right? Your Monsanto, your General
Amazon.
Mills, Amazon, they have all profited to the tune of over $20 billion
Yeah.
versus the private corporations, you know, smaller mom and pop places, have declined by 20%. So the economic model has shifted and really helped the big boys, you know, because if you wanted to get a federal, you know, one of those big sweetheart loans, you had to have like, you know, so many employees. So the rules were stacked in such a way, arguably in such a way, that only the big players could take advantage of them, right? You know, so the Federal Reserve can come in and say, look, you know, if they wanted to make that worse, if they wanted to make that worse, they can say, hey, look, actually they did make it worse, because they basically said if you didn't have a transactional history with us to the tune of like $1 million a year, we wouldn't even consider you for a loan, right? And I understand part of that is protection, because everybody and their grandma is going to be filing for $1 billion loan, you know, with no intention to pay. You know, you keep their one employee that may or may not exist. So I understand from a security perspective that is that way. But it also looks like, well, we're only going to deal with the big boys at this point, and the rest of y'all can go, you know what to do. You know what I'm saying? So is that an optics problem more than a reality problem? It could be, because like I said, there are some security issues with dealing with people that you've never dealt with before versus people that you have a long history of, you know, making goods, services, and financial transactions. So, you know, going forward, I don't know how they're going to deal with that optic. Maybe they can do some things better about it. I don't know. But as far as like, you know, the Federal Reserve has been printing money, you know, left and right, and where's it all been going? Well, so honestly, it's been going into the stock market, which arguably is a good or bad thing, because here's one thing. If they deflate the stock market, all that money they printed goes bye-bye. Like, it's not in people's hands, right? So it just goes bye-bye and the value disappears. But unless things have changed, only about 11 to 12% of the American population, this is just the American population, it's different in every country, is actually invested in the stock market. So the stock market could go to zero tomorrow. And other than the credit issue, which I think they could probably eke out a solution for, it wouldn't affect anybody. But the problem is, and this is the problem that got brought up in 2008, you know, where they said, I forget which Federal Reserve came out and said there would be tanks on the street by tomorrow, you know, if we allow these banks to collapse. So, and part of that issue is the debt market, where, okay, so everything on the commercial side runs on credit, right? And they use their stocks and bonds as a form of holdings for their credit, right? And this is why, you know, I explained a couple shows ago that, you know, silver went so cheap. Silver and other assets went so cheap right before the stock market, you know, started really going down last March, I believe. And that's because everybody, you know, they play in the stock market or whatever, and they use that to hold their credit line. So they say, hey, look, I have this much stock, I have this much assets, I need this much credit. And everything in the business world runs a credit. Like if I want to take a load, you know, to a customer or whatever, that gets paid in advance via credit. And at the end of the month, they redo the books or whatever, and they make sure everybody gets paid, right? That's how everything in the commercial, it's not cash on demand, where so a company is allowed to sell their product, and then on the 30th of the month, they can pay their creditors who lent them the cash to buy that product in the first place, keep their lights on. All of that works on credit. And if you ask me, that's why they're trying to prop everything up. And how long it's going to work, I don't know. Who's it benefiting? I think that's in question as well. So I don't know. I'm a mixed bag on it.
And one of the things with that is, you know, a lot of people have mortgages, right? I mean, like what, 60% of Americans own homes. So it's like, if these banks go down, I mean, these homeowners, you know, they have loans through most of these major banks. So if you're not on a what is it? If you're on an arm where it's, you know, adjustable, the mortgage rate is, you're going to get screwed, because these banks are going to increase that mortgage interest rate so they can try to make you know, ends for whatever financial situation problem that they're in. Now the government may step in if that gets a little out of control, but that's something a lot of people don't look at. And same thing with credit cards. I mean, people have credit cards too. So it's, those things are adjustable like very often. I think quarterly or something like that, monthly. So.
Well, you know, there's kind of two issues there. Okay, so this is what got everybody so ticked off in 2008. The amount of money that they spent on bailing out the banks, which we were in the same problem now as we had in 2008, but it's much larger. It's not just the housing. Everything is in a bubble.
Yeah.
But the amount of money they spent in 2008, they could have paid off every mortgage in America, or refinanced it and say, hey, look, you know what? We're going to put you at, 1.2 interest or whatever, for the next 30 years or 50. They could have probably lower the interest and made it a 15-year note, and then told them you don't qualify. If you take this package, you're not going to qualify for any other loan from the government or whatever, or any other assistance. And, maybe they take their income tax check or something, right? They could have done something like that and to give relief to the owners. But what did they do? They bailed out the banks, which in turn, we're now sitting in the same boat we were in 2008. But now it's not just the housing bubble, it's an entire bubble. But it can't burst because, like I said, nobody has money. I mean, it's
multiple
like,
bubbles everywhere.
part of the issue is like it's a myriad of other issues. I blame a lot of Trump supporters because they thought Trump was going to get reelected and they thought economic boom was coming. Instead of looking at market fundamentals, they were just stuck on that one person in the government was going to change everything.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, even right now, I don't even know with Trump if he would have been reelected.
Would have made a difference. It wouldn't have made a
Yeah,
difference.
I don't know if it would have even made a difference because, like, okay, I know he would probably encourage the state governors to probably open up and reduce these restrictions. But besides that, it would still be up to these Democrat governors who have really made the economic situation much worse. So I don't even know if he would be in a different situation. I mean, he would probably try to do some other economic moves that I'm sure Biden, I don't think he would.
Here's the thing. There's nothing Biden there's nothing Biden can do about it, I don't think.
Yeah.
But I kind of understand. I'm surprised that they didn't use the human virus going around to explain such a drop in the stock market and let it deflate a lot more than they did. They keep it deflate. But part of the issue is this is not an American problem, right? We're in a world depression, not just from the virus going around. So the reason people aren't bailing out all over the world
and the
on
crazy
US
thing
dollars,
is we're probably in better conditions than some of these other countries that completely shut down like everything for very long periods of time. So
but see, there's most of those are smaller countries, 10 million here, 15 million here. I mean, we got states bigger than some of these countries. So not only even if they went into total financial collapse, there are countries out there, like if we banded together with Russia and China, we could bail out basically every country in the world, right? If we wanted to. Whether it be a good idea or not, I don't know. But just picking any of these smaller countries, it's like bailing out a state, right? It'd be tough, it'd be hard, but it could be done. Just like Greece. Greece got bailed out, right? But what do you do when China goes under, or Russia goes under, or America goes under? There's nobody out there to save you.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like a lot of people would like to get out of the dollar, but we're still the best bet around because all these other countries, they can flip over.
And let me note on that too. I think so. I've noticed a lot of interest now from our government and even other governments besides the U.S. that are looking at crypto and different cryptos, and they're even looking into making their own crypto. So that tells me I have a very good feeling. I feel like within the next 5 or 10 years, the U.S. government and other governments are going to start recognizing cryptos and putting these more into like, you know what? Let's look into this. And I would think the US government is either going to take up one of these or they're going to make their own and they're going to back that. Because I was thinking about it and I'm like, if you understand the way crypto works, is it's not just like magical money coming out of the air. It's the way that the mining works is there's something done, there's some type of work done that unlocks that crypto from the chain link or whatever it is. So that's how it's done. And essentially the US could do something similar. They would just have to figure out what they want the work pattern to be or what the work is. So you could even be like the crypto, I don't know, the US dollar crypto, there's actually one called that, but a different type of crypto basically is worth the value of like, I don't know, US GDP or something like that. So they could say that like the US GDP is equivalent. So like every year, you know, you'd probably want it to be positive because if it went negative, then the value would decrease or something, right? So like, I don't know, they could do something basically to make a crypto, and it would get them basically out of this situation with the dollar, because I think they have to do something, because I just think the dollar, I don't know if there's a way to bring the value back anymore. I feel like it's just
Well,
done at this point.
this is why, you know, if you run in certain
And
circles,
the government wants to
they call it the
control it.
petrodollar.
They want to control something. And so that's another reason why they want to control one of the cryptos. They don't want it deregulated.
When the Federal Reserve decides that they're going to go to a crypto style currency, right? I don't think it'll affect most Americans, because not like 93% of all transactions is swiped with a credit card, right?
Yeah.
How do you know it's not already in a Bitcoin style system,
Exactly.
right? The other issue is I don't think there'll be any mining, and I don't think it'll be a blockchain style system more for accounting purposes than it will be for like me and you. We won't get to mine it, right? Because
the reason none of the public would be able to mine it. I know that. It would be the government doing it.
What is the strength? Because the Federal Reserve is in America. This is the American Federal Reserve here. I'm not talking about the rest of the world. They don't really hold any money. You know, they're not really reserve. They're not federal. What do they actually do for the most part? Well, they print money, right? They add digital dollars to a screen, and then those get used to buy up things like bonds. And this is how they adjust their interest. The Federal Reserve just doesn't go in and says, "Oh, the bond today is going to be 1.45%," because I think it's what it is today for the 10-year note, right?
Yeah.
So they don't go in there and say it. What they do is they go into the open market and they provide bonds to people, right, at lower interest rates, and that causes all the other interest rates to go lower, because if I don't like your interest rate, the Federal Reserve is always willing to lend me one at a really great rate. So what they do is they keep doing this, and it dumps dollars, you know, or bonds out on the market, and which gets traded. So that's how they influence, you know, the money supply out in I guess they call it the M2 money supply, the money supply out there in the population's hands. That's how they control interest rates, is they do it by dumping money in certain sectors. So I kind of forgot where I was going with this.
Well, and they would have to print some, I think, just for the matter to be some type of physical something, I think they would have to either recognize dollar bills as some type of physical currency at times, because I don't think they could go fully digital at first. Yeah, some type of transition where it's like there will still be some type of physical, and like that, probably just one token or something, a dollar bill, whatever it is, because it'll probably just be one, you know, one type of currency. I don't think it's going to be like, you know, a $1 bill, a $5 bill, 10, all that stuff. I think it's just going to be one type of token is worth this. You know what I mean? Just like it is in crypto world, where it's like one token is worth this.
It's like US coin. Or
exactly.
USD coin. But see, that's where I was going with this, is the fact that, okay, if you take away the Federal Reserve's ability to generate coins, or whatever you want to call it, on the fly whenever they want, they can no longer influence the market. So they can't do anything at that point. So they will never be tied to gold. They will never be tied to silver.
Yeah.
They'll never be tied to Bitcoin.
Right.
They might be tied to oil, because the oil they can keep pumping out of the ground, right? So they can just
for now, at least. For now, they run electric. So
for now, and like I said before, the problem is with electric is the battery technology. We just like if you got stranded in the middle of nowhere, you know, and somebody can't bring you 5 gallons of gas, dump in your tank, and you keep going. No, you gotta have somebody bring a special vehicle out, charge you up, so you can go 2 miles down the road, and hopefully there's someplace else there. You're gonna call in the service truck out there, right? So we're battery storage technology, but that's another issue.
Well, let me tell you this: Neo actually does have those batteries. I think we went over them before, but where you can swap them out. So maybe you'll be able to even own extra batteries too in the future. I don't know. We'll see.
At $20,000 a battery,
I mean, you'll just be having batteries all over your cars, so like hopefully you don't get in a wreck. But
well, see, and that's another thing, is like, okay, the Federal Reserve gets to decide a lot of where all this extra money goes. So they can also influence, different companies that they want to. And are they picking the right kind of companies? Is it fair to pick companies? They get specific. Maybe
and the
they don't
money's
really go.
anonymous too. With crypto, it's anonymous.
Well, I'm talking as like the Federal Reserve. It's not as anonymous as people would like to think it is, right? Because every transaction is built onto the back of the blockchain, right?
Yeah.
That's how they verify that that whoever it's going is where it's going. But it'll be the opposite with the Federal Reserve, because if they come out and say,
and let me note on that too. This is something I realized. So back in the day, it was definitely anonymous. However, the problem nowadays is there are private companies that own these different crypto exchanges and wallets. So therefore, when you sign up for these, I don't know if you've signed up for one yet. If you do, I recommend the Celsius app. By the way, you get great. Hold on a second. Let me get into Celsius real quick. If you're on Celsius, you earn great interest rates, and it's not interest rates based on the dollar because you don't want the dollar anymore. It's interest rates based on the crypto itself. So you're gonna earn more crypto while you're in Celsius, and I'm talking about up to like, depending on the crypto, up to like 10%. So like that is extremely high. And if crypto is going up in value and you're earning more like interest, it's great. I mean, you can't save any better than that. But anyways, what were you saying?
Well, I was going to go on some tangent about, part of the issues. You said nobody wants dollars. The problem with dollars and all these other currencies are the U.S. dollar is the prettiest girl at the party. I mean, it may be a party of old hags and they're all about to die, but she's still the best one. So beggars can't be choosers, right? And that's kind of the issue, we have all around the world, where you still need dollars for now to make certain transactions, like buy oil. Dollars are universally accepted anywhere. Everybody takes them. So it's an easy exchange for monetary stuff, which is why, do you want the yuan or the ruble or I don't say Krugerrands or whatever, where they're not as stable as the US dollar. So everybody's in the same boat. So everybody's sticking to US dollars because as of right now, US dollars are still a sure thing. And so, which, at least said for now, at least. So,
and then imagine that if the US government does pick up a crypto, that's going to be the cool new thing. In the
they'll come out with their own crypto. I can almost guarantee they'll come out with it. Because like I said, if they don't have the ability to manufacture as many as they want, whenever they want, the Federal Reserve has no purpose anymore, because they can't regulate interest rates at that point. So they're going to have their own. It'll be a closed system. And I guarantee you, whether they want it to happen or not, everything you buy and sell, that's how they'll probably end up taxing you as well. So like right now, there's a lot of what the government calls black market economy, right? Which is really just me and another person deciding we got cash, let's use it, and we don't give Uncle Sam their cut, right? Which is taxation is really theft, because every time you do something, the government gets 10% regardless of what, for something that they may or may not done. I mean, like Bill Maher brought up, I don't know what I'm getting for my tax money, because I drive down, the I-5 or whatever, and it's got potholes everywhere. So that's a whole nother discussion, of the.
And honestly, I'm gonna tell you, with that discussion, I would say, I mean, I think we're at the point now where private companies could just take care of the roads. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, there's a demand out there. Right, there's a demand there. So I mean, I don't. Now at the beginning of the nation, like, okay, sure, maybe the government should take it over at the beginning, but we're beyond that, right? So like, I don't know.
Well, I would say yes and no, because
even a mixed system, private and public.
I'm just gonna pick on China on this one real quick, because there was actually a story in the BBC about this. I believe it was BBC, but they have a lot of problem with like really poor roads in like China, especially out there in the middle of nowhere. Where, like, the concrete crumbles if you just touch it, right? Because the concrete was really poor, or they mix too much sand in it to try and save on concrete. So I think, for anything, that's what I would call it public service and public roads, which I think, roads are like police. We all benefit from police. We just don't always like them sometimes, right? So, hey, what's true? Hey, we all benefit from certain things that the government does provide, like trash service, right? We all benefit from that, because nobody wants to have a million rats at the house next door because there's no place to dump the trash, right? So we all benefit from that. We all benefit from police, because none of us want to walk into Walmart and get our brains blown out over
nobody wants to hire everyone. everyone doesn't want to hire their own private security, you know. That would
Yeah,
just be
well,
crazy.
yeah, and then we all benefit. When they come out and for fender benders and they take a police report, they're kind of like a referee there at that point, right? So roads are kind of the same thing where we all benefited. Like right now, I can go right down the road to a truck stop or whatever, and I get to drive on the road that in theory I didn't pay for because I don't live here. So there's certain things we all benefit, and we benefit from government oversight to say, hey, look, this ain't right. Now we run into problems where and this is why it's usually illegal, where you have a politician taking bribes from, let's say, a road construction crew, which, I mean, it happens all the time anyway. But at least somebody's there making sure, hey, I'm taking your bribe, but you're still going to build it right, or else my people are going to roast me, right? So that's why, this oversight thing is really an important issue. And especially with, just bringing back to the, Federal Reserve or any reserve. If you have private corporations who can decide at will how we're going to run things, and we get to decide who the winners and losers are, because that's really what they do. They pick winners and losers. And the government's been a great example of this. So, this brings up a larger issue later. It was like, okay, why does Amazon get to stay open, but somebody's mom and pop gas station can't, right? Even though they're selling the exact same product, there's still at some point there's human interaction there. Why can't mom and pop decide to come out? And then why is it the government can tell you, like if me and you, I brought this example up, want to exchange raw milk or cheese or whatever, and we both understand the transaction we're making here, what role does the government have to say that we can't do that, right? Just like, I'm a private property, right? So if I walk into somebody's private property, whether it be a gas station or an HEB or a Walmart, and they ask me to put a mask on, well, I can agree to that because it's not an infringement on my right, because I have a right to go someplace else to a point, right? Where, okay, I don't want to do it, or I want to do it. Hey, I'm just going here for 30 seconds, slap it on, get what I'm going, and get out of here. Because I respect that company's right to say what happens on their own property, right? Now, what I don't appreciate is when that company makes it impossible for me to go someplace else. That's a little different story, right? But if in general, it's like, okay, look, I'm a right to carry guy, right? If you want to carry open, concealed, if you're not wearing a license, if they send that to me in a jury, I'm going to say that guy's not guilty because of the Second Amendment, right? But if a company decides that they don't want somebody open carrying a firearm in their store, I'm cool with that too, because it's your private property. And this is something we get on our next show about the mortgage moratorium stuff. So, but when we have technically a private company, the Federal Reserve, getting to decide who wins and lose, especially in this economic situation, where the government's been really bad about it too. That's the point I was getting at. The government's been really bad at it too. Deciding who gets to survive and who doesn't get to survive. I think that's a question which I'm not sure there's a right answer to, but at the same time, we can't stay where we're at. If that makes sense.
And I was gonna say on the Celsius thing earlier, or exchanges, what I was saying is because there's private companies now, and you have to register like your social security, all this stuff for tax. Well, there's not really tax purposes yet, but I'm sure there will be.
Oh, I guarantee you the tax people are looking.
So like
I guarantee
this year,
you the big banks are buying.
when I did my taxes this year, all they said was like, "Did you sell, trade, or do any crypto?" And I said yes, and that was it. And I was like, but so that tells me something's going to happen in the future. But anyways, they can track that, because if you're operating on one of these, private systems with a company, well, then they could be like, okay, well, where's this address from? And then they could easily ask these exchange companies, wallets, whatever they are, and they should be able to track it down easily because it's their accounts and stuff. So I don't think it's private anymore.
This is something, an interesting thing. Okay, so most of you are probably familiar with that. A couple of days ago, the automatic clearinghouse (ACH) system of the Federal Reserve went down. Right, it went down for like 6 or 8 hours. Right. So, I mean, that is a fundamental, I would say, benefit, because what do? They're actually like an escrow account, right, where the Federal Reserve is facilitating the transaction of funds primarily overseas, right? So like, if you buy something overseas and you send a wire transfer, and actually banks are doing the wire transfer for you. So when you swipe your credit card and if something's coming out of Bangladesh or Europe or South America, your funds are not going directly to that individual. That individual is getting their funds from their bank because your bank said, hey, there was a record of transaction here. my customer says that your customer is owed this much money, he has this much in his account, and I'm going to wire the funds, usually at like midnight, right? Where they wire the funds to the other bank. And that's one of the roles that the central bank actually does. So that is a plus benefit. So when we go to like a blockchain style system, I think that would make that system more efficient and less prone to fraud.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so let's wrap this up. You got to pick one of the following, though. I feel like just to get where you side at. I think I said earlier where I side. I think there should be like some type of multiple independent bank type system or something. Obviously, if we went into crypto, that I think that maybe would change. But with the current system, do you think there should be no Federal Reserve, the current system we have right now, an independent Federal Reserve, or independent Federal Reserve with multiple banks?
Well, two of those are actually the same. I'm going to tell you how I think it needs to be, based upon the role that they do, and the fact that I can't tell the difference between what we got now, as being private or basically fascist, right? Let's just say it's fascist. I'm going to say that central bank should be wholly in the hands of the federal government.
So basically the same
system
we have. Huh?
I can't go with any of those because I don't think
think
it's right.
He's a politician. Kenny giving a politician answer.
Because all those systems, okay.
You got to pick one.
Okay, what were the answers again before I lose you?
So no Federal Reserve, the current system we have, a independent Federal Reserve, or an independent Federal Reserve with multiple banks that you can, so independent Federal Reserves would be the last one.
I'm going to go with the nuclear option and dissolve it.
Say no Federal Reserve.
At this point in time,
I guess.
Just like it was prior.
That would be the typical libertarian answer too. I think I'm on the latter on this one, surprisingly, because the only issue I have with no Federal Reserve is I just don't know what that would look like, and I don't know. My biggest beef, I guess, would be the stability issue,
of which we have none. Of really, I mean, if you honestly look at it, we really don't.
Well, from that graph, it showed at least the independent Federal Reserve seemed to, for now, have better stability.
But we all know 50 years from now. Yeah. Well, this is what I was saying. It's like when you get to a point where the Federal Reserve is causing the problem and you can get no accountability for it, and they obviously don't represent you, they don't have a legitimate right to exist, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of people would argue, and I don't know if it's a valid argument, that since the Federal Reserve was not actually voted in properly, they shouldn't exist anyway. But I think that's a separate argument. Whether or not they're good or bad, I understand that they perform certain functions that benefit us all, like DACH, right? Other than that, I'm not seeing any long-term benefit to what they're doing that couldn't be handled in private hands. Could it be done better as a centralized system? I would say yes. But under the current model we're operating on, we're on a nice edge whether or not we lose this economy, which is not entirely based upon the human virus running around. I would say that they don't have a really legitimate right to exist, and they're not performing the job that they're supposed to, and they're just fucking lying to us.
All right, Kenny. Well, if you want to wrap it up here, go ahead. If you want to close this.
This goes back to morals issue, right? If you don't have moral people running the system, it's not going to work. I mean, and I understand the argument that if they just took the nuclear option, took the Band-Aids off, and let it all go, there's potentially some very bad outcomes, right? People starving on the streets, millions of people homeless, people not able to get goods and services, to where they need to be on a timely manner. Oh wait, we're already there. Maybe it doesn't matter. So, but without morals, if you don't have a way to hold those people accountable for the actions they take, it's going to go downhill. So unless they change that, and I understand it's hard to get moral people up there because they sing and dance and say their song, to convince us to vote for them. As soon as they get in, we find out they're sucking on the tit of somebody else, and that's where they're getting their bread and butter from. So. We got to wake up to the fact that it's happening, and then we got to wake up to the fact that we have to put people in there. Whether or not we like some of the choice they get, as long as they're moral and they're justified, we got to go along with it. We can't just play partisan politics from now on because it makes us feel good at night. We got to get some stones. So,
all right. Well, you guys heard it. If you made it this far in the video, I'd be really surprised. If you did make it this far, leave a comment. That would be great. But yeah, so please like our content, follow, subscribe, all the good stuff. Definitely comment what you think, maybe your thoughts on the Federal Reserve, and what we should do. But yeah, that's all we have for this one. So thank you guys, and this has been another American Experience.
Hey, thanks for watching the Red, White, and Matt Show with Kenny. Please like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for another American Experience.